Followed by the barrel and a bruise of many. Kaise bani, kaise bani, kaise bani, kaise bani. Bolori bena chatani, kaise bani. Bolori bena chatani, kaise bani. So people are gathered for the event this morning. Everybody's out here bright and early. So it's a big trip.
Next to contender. They're both on the carbon coast. And it's better for living than the two.
That we should have everybody who generally comes on the Zoom meet in person. And so we've been trying to do that. But why do you do that? Why you came up with that plan?
Because going into 4 years now, every Sunday we meet on Zoom. And we see people's face. Sometimes we don't even name, but we thought it was time to meet in person. So the idea came about that we should organize a talk. First in Trinidad, then we went to Suriname, then to Guyana, and now we are in Guyana. A lot of people wanting to come. Some people were supposed to be here. They bought tickets, registered and so on, but some mishap at home and they couldn't come. And then we are planning for South Africa in August, and probably hopefully with Shani's help, Jamaica or Belize next year. But Shani will be the lead. And Richard.
So let me just say this. You weren't aware, but this morning I got up. I didn't brush my hair or anything. I was eating something that Shakira brought me that Zayn left on the table. So I was eating.
The last time I've seen so many Trinidadians was when I was at the university in Canada. At the University of Alberta, there was a very strong contingent of Trinidadians. Not so many Tobagonians. And we had a lot of good time. We drank a lot of rum. But we still passed our exams, got our degrees. And one of my sisters was at one time married to a Trinidadian, a Ramblad from somewhere in the south. But it's good to see you here. Jahajis on the trek. After, this is a long trek, starting from 1838, coming here, 1845 in Trinidad. And before I say anything, I wanted to welcome you with a Guyanese national song, not the national anthem, but something that the Tamba knows very well because we have sung it together several times. You all come sing? Yeah. So it's Oh Beautiful Guyana. It's not a very long song, but at one time it was considered for the national anthem, but another song beat it up. So it goes like this. Oh beautiful Guyana, oh my lovely native land, more dear to me than all the world, thy sea-washed sun is stands, and down upon the border, looking out upon the deep, the great Atlantic's blowing to a fury. All asleep at morn, at noon, or better in the crimson sunset's glow. I love thee, oh, I love thee. British Guyana, 1845 was the beginning of the second batch, which, as in Trinidad, came between 1845 and 1848. Then there was a stoppage for a few years. But the first Indians, British Indians, as they were, because that was British India, it was conquered by the British in 1757, at least that particular area in Bihar, Bengal, Orissa, Calcutta. And 1834 slavery was abolished, and 1838 the period of apprenticeship came to an end on the 1st of August of that particular year, although it was supposed to run for 2 more years. And British planters were very anxious. They wanted to know if the freed slaves, the formerly enslaved, would go back to work. So they decided to hedge their bets and try to get alternative sources of labor, including British India. They tried a lot of Europeans, but they failed. They died very quickly. Portuguese, Germans, Maltese, even British, they didn't make it. So British India was already supplying indentured laborers to Mauritius from 1830. And actually, because Mauritius was closer, much closer to India than the Caribbean, thousands of Indians were sent to Mauritius, like 10,000, 20,000, etc. And they revived the sugar industry in Mauritius. So John Gladstone, who became Sir John Gladstone, the father of William Ure Gladstone, who became British Prime Minister on 4 occasions, he had some relatives in Calcutta who were involved in shipping indentured laborers to Mauritius. The company of Gillanders Arbuthnot company. And he wrote to them and he asked if they could arrange to get some people to come to his estates. He had 7 estates here in British Guyana. Actually, going back into the 1820s, he had these estates, and one of them was very famous in an infamous incident in 1823 on the East Coast. You may have heard of the 1823 rebellion or the 1823 uprising in which hundreds of slaves were killed, starting from Plantation Success, which was a Gladstone estate. He was an absentee landowner. He never set foot in British Guyana. One of his sons did come after, but he ran his estate using lawyers as agents, as managers. And of course, they were out for themselves. He didn't really know what was going on. So the estates were run quite inefficiently, and the slaves were essentially victimized and maltreated. Eventually, there was the uprising. So by 1838, he had reduced his number of plantations from 7 to 2. And these 2 plantations are over the Demerara River, right, to our left. At Vredenhoek, which is right basically at the mouth of the Demerara River. And Vredenstein, which was way down the Demerara River, is no longer, it's covered by bush now, but it used to be an estate. So he had these 2 estates. And he asked his, I think it was his nephew, to send some people from India. And in addition, some of Gladstone's friends who owned sugar estates here, the Moss brothers of Liverpool, John Moss and Henry Moss, they owned Anna Regina. Actually, it was one of the estates with the best health records in British Guyana, in Essequibo. The Barclay and Davidson Company, which had 2 estates in Berbice, Highbury and Waterloo. Actually, the Barclay estates were owned by a man called Aeneas Barclay. And one of his sons, Sir Henry Barclay, succeeded him and for a period of time was governor of British Guyana. He was also a governor in Jamaica and elsewhere. As the total amount of Indians arriving in British Guyana between 1838 and 1917, and that's 238,909. And this is taken from a publication of two professors of the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, maybe both dead now, G.W. Roberts and J. Byrne in 1966. So the Roberts and Byrne number is the standard number that is used in all scholarly work. There were some other numbers. Our first famous statistician of Indo-Guyanese history, Dwarkanath, published a history of Indians in British Guyana in 1950, republished it in 1970. And in his tabulation, he had 239,149, which is higher than Roberts and Byrne's 238,909. And then again, in the colonial literature, you'll see numbers like 238,979, 238,969, and then there is a much lower number, which was I found in a book by Professor Basdeo Mangru, who has written at least 8 books. He's our most prolific Indo-Guyanese historian, still alive in his 80s in New York. He had a smaller number, 238, one something. But he didn't say where this number came from. He just put the number. They had no calculation, just a number. So, land of swizzles, land of gin, land of every kind of sin. Why have I been doomed to roam far, so far away from home? An Englishman wrote this, but this could be applicable to the Jahajis who came in between 1838 and 1917. So I told all those people in the Mandir, I said, when your ancestors came, they had to pray under a tree. They didn't have a building. They had to pray out in the open someplace, in the field. Right? The first Mandir in British Guyana was constructed in 1846 in Berbice by the people who left Highbury. They were there from 1846. We are not too sure when the first Masjid was built, but we hear about the Philadelphia Masjid of Essequibo. But that's been contested. So these ancestors, they prayed in the open, right? They have to remember their culture from India. They had few clothes. They worked like they virtually were slaves. They were the Indian slaves of the British, replacing the African slaves. Although they were paid, it was still, the conditions were still those of slavery. Right? Snakes were all over the place. Imagine you get bitten by a poison snake in those days. That's it, you're finished. There's no anti-venom. The barrier hits you. Fairly lost. I think what do you call it in Trinidad? Market ear or something.
Ear.
Yeah. Yes. You're hit by one of that. That's it. You're finished. Right? In those days. Mosquitoes. There was endless malaria. My great grandmother died from malaria. Malaria was rampant until the 1940s when it was reaching back in the interior. Right? So those Indians had to struggle with malaria. They had to struggle with filaria. They had to struggle with yellow fever. All sorts of viruses and bacteria. Right? Plus, in those days, you had to use the trench water for drinking and defecating, urinating, same water. Right? Unless you were, say, out in Regina, where you had the ocean and so on, and you had a breeze coming in, blow away insects. So you had these ancestors living in these horrible conditions. And here you are sitting down in an air-conditioned mandir, listening to Panditji, right, with the most modern musical instruments, serenading the congregation, and good singers and harmonium players and bulak beaters and so on. Right? And you look around, lights, good. Your murtis, man, they're colorful. You know, all the goddesses, long hair and so on. You know, the entire place looks so modern. But to compare that with what you have now, to what your ancestors came with.
And my sister, you are my father, and my mother. Lovely, beautiful girl. Oh no! It's a jokey like Evans.
African,
One day, someday, I'd like to go to India. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you read into this. I don't care that I understand half of what the people say. But the call is stronger now. The push factors are stronger now. One day, someday, I'd like to go to India, the land of my ancestors. But my brother says, why spend all that money to go all the way there when the tombs of our family are covered in bush right here, right here. Speak out against this disrespect to our dearly beloved. One day, someday, I'd like to go to India. I don't care what my brothers say. I don't care what you read into this. But you know, you can think Africa. You can think China. You can think Madeira, Malta, Germany, Ireland. But for me, one day, someday, I'd like to go to India to see the Taj Mahal. But my friends say, why spend all the money to go all the way there when your sisters right here worship the ground on which you walk, right here, right here. Show them respect, seek their blessing, touch their feet. One day, someday, I'd like to go to India to visit the birthplace of famous men and women, walk in the footsteps of the great sons and daughters of India, Sachin Tendulkar, Mohandas Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Lata Mangeshkar, Ashwari Rai, Indira Gandhi. But my colleagues say, why spend all that money to go all the way there when our land is littered with unsung heroes? Pay them their dues. Pay them their dues. One day, someday, I'd like to go to India to visit the tea gardens and trade tea. But the reed woman at Border Market, you'll be going there soon. Why spend all that money when you can make tea with lemongrass, daisy, clover, tulsi, neem, right here for a couple of dollars? One day, someday, I'd like to go to India for a nature cure, a dip in the Ganges, a curative mud bath. But here our politician, it's election time, and there's a whole lot of mudslinging going on right here, right here. Well, of course, I like to visit the slums of Slumdog Millionaire. But the roadside parliament says, why go all the way there and spend all that money when we have our own slums to repair right here in Tiger Bay and Hell's Kitchen. One day, someday, I'd like to go to India. I don't care what you say, I don't care what you read into this, but you can think. You can think Africa. You can think China, yes. You can think Madeira, Malta, Germany, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Belize. But for me, one day, someday, I like to go to India to meet a real Desi girl. But the woman said, why spend that money when there are so many intelligent, assertive, beautiful women in Guyana? Hail up to the Guyanese women.
Yeah,